do. Right. Well, what I want to chat to you today about, I think what I'm going to chat to you today about, was sort of suggested to me by a couple of people who follow my channel, and they asked because I mentioned a little while back about Albert. Albert with my black Land Rover, and there's a bit of a story about that, and some folk have said, well, why don't you share your story? What's the story with Albert? So I'm going to tell you what the story is. Here, let me just sit down. I first bought a 2020 Defender in August. I think it was about the 8th of August, I think. And I bought it off the lot. It was a P300 black 110. And I bought it off lot. It was the base model, the S model. And in many respects, I think I preferred it to what we've got now, this 110, because I like the P300 better. I think it's a better engine, and it didn't have any of the fancy electrics sort of steering or electric seats, and it was a bit more Defender, really, or a bit more honest, and it were also $14,000 cheaper. So there's lots of things going for it that I preferred. I don't know that I prefer the electric seats, and once you set steering, you never use it again. So I don't see point in it myself. But that's the story. So we picked this one up. It were on forecourt. It was the first one that JLR Calgary had. I think they'd sold one earlier on, and they got this P300, which presumably wasn't popular because small engine, and folks in Calgary, like, they just wanted all power, don't they? Because them folk aren't really, they don't have the history with Land Rovers, I suppose, because they've not been over here. So the underpowered Defenders and sort of sluggish gearing isn't really their kind of thing. They're used to Range Rovers and Range Rover Sports and all that kind of stuff, and Discoveries, and none of them are like Third Land Rover, are they? But I liked it. I thought it were better. It felt better. It felt honest, and it's still, sorry Finn, I know you're listening, but it felt a bit better than this in many respects. But I bought it and I drove it all the way back down, which is about 300 mile really, down to where we live. And it broke down. We got in town, and it heard a bit of a clunk from underneath, sort of gearbox clunk, quite a sharp clunk really. And all fancy warning lights came up on dashboard, and it was a bit of a story. So I pulled round corner and switched it off and tried to switch it back on again, and it wouldn't start because it kept coming up with a fault code that said vehicle not in park. And it was in park because when if you release the handbrake, it sort of lolled on that park pin, if you know what I mean. So I pushed it about a bit and tried roster it out to see if there was a bit of a solenoid issue on park pin, see if it were just stuck newness, or something. And about 10 minutes later, it decided that it would go and fire up and everything were grand. But this were after calling for the frankly quite useless Land Rover Assist, who were not only useless but quite rude. That's another story. Anyway, I cancelled the Land Rover Assist as they were sending them on out to pick it up from Calgary. So it was going to take them 4 hours to turn up. And it was balmy hot, and the kids had been... we picked it up from Calgary, and the kids had been on holiday. We've not been home yet. Still got all camping gear and clothes and everything sat it back at Land Rover, and the Anna had out to eat. So present Mrs. Firth took kids down the road, just to block down the road to where there was a Wendy's, and they had some food, and I tried to fiddle about with Albert, get him going again, and any road he did, and we drove home, and all were good. So I just put it down to a bit of an annoyance, really. And I did another trip the following day, which weren't very long, and everything went according to plan. And then on the following day, daughter needed to be somewhere. She got a party to go to or some such thing, so we all jumped in, and we were last minute Larry leaving house, like we are. I'm not very good at keeping time. I like just jingle on at my own leisure, I do. And so we were a bit late leaving house and jumped in car, and it only made it round corner out at block and packed up at the side of the road, same clunk and everything and all drama. Anyway, I didn't bother calling Land Rover Assist because they were useless first time I called them and rude. And so I ended up calling AMA out basically because that's the Canadian equivalent to AA, and brought them out and you're in shade there, aren't and faces in shade, and brought them out and they came and turned up to pick up the car, sort of pretty much straight away really. It was only half an hour, but for whatever reason we just walked back to the house and I picked, and Guy said he were coming, so I walked over and started the car and it fired straight up and drove back home. Any road, it was clear to me that there were somewhere to miss, and so I told him to carry on up to Calgary and took it up Calgary, and that's what they did. They drove it up Calgary on back at low load. The issue that developed was because Land Rover in Calgary didn't really pay a lot of attention to what I'd told them about the fault, because they just assumed, their techs just assumed that they knew more about things than I do. Now, I can tell you that the first time it happened, I shoved in me I've got a Gap 2D reader, which is a very sort of advanced OBD2 reader that I'd used on me L322 and on present Mrs. First L494, and on me LR3 and all the other things that I've had. And I plugged it in and it came up with a bunch of transmission faults and codes, and I'd saved a log of them without deleting anything. I hadn't cleared anything, and I'd just gone in to see what codes were present, because I knew I needed a history of the code. So I sent that over to the techs up in Calgary, and they sort of ignored them completely and proceeded to follow protocol. And the protocol that they follow isn't very good. And this is possibly the biggest disadvantage to Land Rovers, is that their techs are very sort of protocol based and don't think outside the box. Sadly, they don't have a lot of mechanics anymore, if they've got any at all. What they've got is a bunch of fitters who take off bits and put on new bits, and away you go. And that I don't like doing that. For an example, I've just bought a girlfriend's L494 a gear depressing lever interlock switch thing broke at -40. Not surprising after 149,000 miles or whatever it is. So I stripped it apart at -40, pulled it out and glued it all, pulled out the broken pin, found the missing bit. Clearly couldn't fix it, so I developed, I made some steel supports, and then I araldited, as we call it in England, sort of an epoxy glue, the steel supports to the broken bit, and then sort of fabricated the broken bit, shoved it all back together, and it worked for another 4 days, and we ordered a new bit. But when I called the Land Rover guys, he said, "Oh no, you got to buy gear shift, and it comes with a new module." I don't want the module. He said, "Well, we've got to put the module on, because then we've got to code it, and then you've got to use the computer to activate and, tell the car that there's a new module." And that all seemed a bit sort of advanced for me. But one of the problems with that kind of activity is, of course, you've lost the ability to fix stuff. Because they just take off old bits and shove in new bits, and they've forgotten how to save money, and they charge you $918 for a new clip, for instance, which is silly. But Land Rover's gone like that, and there's not a lot we can do about it. Anyway, going back to the story, so I sent all information over, plus what I considered to be my diagnosis, which was, at the time, either a failing solenoid or an electrical wiring issue between the transmission module and the engine, the body control module, some sort of a, like a missing plug or like a broken wire or a trap wire or something. That what I thought were the issue. Anyway, they told me that their official opinion was that it just needed some software updates. But they were 300 mile away, so I wanted it to be right, because I'd also got towed my caravan home, which I'd left at Jaguar Land Rover because they hadn't had time to fit the tow bar. Another story. So they told me it was ready to pick up, and I said, "Well, I'm coming up and I'll bring the kids up for the day, and I'll pick the Land Rover up. Meanwhile, you should have had time, this is me telling Land Rover, to put on the ladder and the roof rack and the pannier that was ordered before me buying the car, and should have been ready, and according to them was going to be ready by the Friday, and this was probably I think this was the Wednesday the week after. So the story was, yes, it'd all be ready. We've just done the software updates. They've been out for a test drive. There's no bother with the car. You just come and pick it up. Any road. We'd stopped and the car hadn't come back from the test drive when we actually got up there, and I dropped the kids off at the zoo. And I'd gone to pick the car up, but I'd just seen it coming around the corner. It didn't have a roof rack on it or a pannier or a ladder. So when I got in there, I had a bit of a chat with the guys, and I'm like, well, where's the ladder? And, oh, well, they're on back order. I said, well, you told me they'd arrived last Friday and they were ready to go on, and you guarantee it being on by Wednesday. And where are we now? So what had happened then is we got two sort of faults with Jaguar Land Rover in Calgary. And the first fault was that they hadn't sort of properly diagnosed the issue of the mechanical breakdown. And the second fault was that they'd promised to order me these bits and told me they were in and told me they were going to fit them and then didn't fit them. So I sort of kicked off a bit here because, of course, it's 300 miles, a long way and a lot of money in fuel. And I got the kids there, and I didn't believe that the Land Rover were right, even though they were telling me it were. And so we had a bit of a sort of not a falling out, it's not the right word, but we had words. And they had to get their garage foreman chap, a manager, to come in and have a word. And so we had these words, and he apologised profusely, and he said there'd been a miscommunication between the parts department and the service department, and some of the parts were actually here, but some of them weren't. And what they would do is they would pay for, it was very kind of them, to pay for a hotel for the night, and they'd put on the bits they had, and if we were all right to go without the bits we'd had, and they'd give us, food and give us some money for food and whatever, and we were to have a night on them in Calgary. So this was sort of decided. That's how it worked out. Anyway.
Are you hungry?
I'm not, pal, no. Little lad's asking me if I'm hungry. So what happened then was we stayed the night in Calgary, and I picked the car up in the morning, and they had put on the ladder. And they put on the ladder and put the roof rack on, and the pannier, but they hadn't got around to fitting the toe hooks that fit behind the bumper. So they'd taken off the bumper to fit the tow bar, so they had got that sorted. But for whatever reason, they hadn't fit the tow bar up, which was another story. So I got there and I was unhappy, because if you're going to take the bumper off, which you need to fit the tow bar, you might as well fit the tow hooks while you're at it. And they didn't, and so the conversation went a bit like, well, I'm not paying any more money to take the bumper off again, because you should have done that and fitted the toe. Yeah, well, we didn't know what you wanted then. Well, it was well reported on the email that I sent through the service, and you just didn't follow it really, or read it or anything. Anyway, so they apologised for that. There were some more words. The general manager had to get involved, and I was sort of stuck there a day after we should have been home with the kids, and present Mrs. Firth had an extra day off whatever it was she were doing, and kids were stuck where they didn't need to be. So it was all going a bit horribly wrong at this point. So what happened then was we decided that we'd drive home again, and they would get all the parts in and they'd fit everything for free. All I'd have to do is come back up again to have all that lot done. And so that was what was agreed. And I drove the Land Rover into the parking lot, there's Albert, into the parking lot where my caravan was. I hitched up the caravan. I got probably 20 yards out of the parking lot where the caravan was, with the caravan on the back and the Land Rover packed up. Same fault, clunk on transmission. So this time, because I was up there, I didn't touch anything, and I got some techs who do know what they're talking about. I asked for one in particular to come out with a computer and we'd have a look. And so we did, and so what my initial diagnosis seemed to be right. There was a loss of communication between the TCM, the transfer control module, and the BCM, the body control module. And so it was decided that they'd have to keep it in Land Rover because there was a problem. So we got it back at 6 o'clock. He stayed back a little bit, and both he and I went in garage and started pulling stuff out. underneath car because I didn't trust him. I don't trust many of the techs there, and this guy knew what he was talking about, but I didn't know how much he knew, if you know what I mean, because he was a newish fella to me. I wasn't really familiar with him, but he did seem halfway right. Any road, getting away from story here, but so we pulled car apart basically there inside, and it was clear that there was a problem with the communication with wiring between TCM and BCM. But it was getting for 6:30 and he couldn't stay any longer, and the shop manager at Land Rover were getting antsy because he were having to pay overtime instead of getting things fixed. So we had a bit of a chat with general manager, and general manager said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, look, you let drop ball here. I've given you a clear email of what the problem were. You didn't address it. You've told me all bits were ordered, but they weren't ordered, and and some of them aren't even here. You've overcharged me for a block heat that car hasn't had fitted, and you've overcharged me for 3M protection, which also hadn't had fitted. I said, you've promised to have my car back. I'm still sat here 3 days later in Calgary, and we're nae car and nae out. And I said, and your guy in garage who's telling me that it takes 6 hours to take bumper off, and I know a bloke who's sat at a campsite and taking it off in an hour. So there's a lot wrong here. Your garage manager doesn't seem to know what he's talking about, and you're telling me you're on top at ball, and you're not on top at ball, because I've come back here and ball's still in dropped somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and nobody's got any idea what's going on. You still don't know where my barts are, and they're certainly not on car. And so there was a big hoo-ha, and we had a big sit-down meeting, and so the general manager stepped up and he said, look, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll get this car right for tomorrow. I will take all the bits off another one and put it on yours. And I said, well, that's very kind of you. Make it happen, and we'll go ahead. He said, yeah, I'll be on it. And come by noon tomorrow, it'll be done. So I rolled up with the fam. They paid for another night for us all in Calgary, and I rolled up with the fam in Calgary and picked this car up. And he still didn't have bits on it. And general manager came out, and he had to take the shop garage manager to one side and have a chat to him, because he'd promised one thing and garage manager had promised something, and now it had happened. So I'd still not got me bits. The bumper was still weren't on. No, they still didn't have tow hooks, and car still weren't fixed because they hadn't found problem. They hadn't found transmission issue. So things devolved even more then, and I walked outside with the general. I said, I've come outside, I'm not talking. I didn't want to speak loudly in the showroom, so I said, let's go outside. And I went outside, and I sort of leant on Finn, oddly enough, that was sat right outside the door. And I said, this ain't good enough. This isn't going to work. I said, you've got bigger problems than I have. I said, because you're telling me one thing and you've told general manager to do it, and he hadn't. I said, so you've got all kinds of problems that I haven't got, but my problem is I haven't got a car that I'm paying for. And he said, well, what do you want to do about it? And I turned round, and Finn were there, and I said, well, I just sort of gestured. I said, I want a car that I wanted. And he said, well, what's wrong with that one? And I said, well, I'm looking at this, what's wrong with that one? That's what I wanted. Because you'd already got roof rack and pannier on and ladder on and a budget of other things, and bonnet kit, and so it had got stuff on it that I wanted. And I said, well, nothing's wrong with that. I said, we didn't have this the other day. He said, no, it came this morning at 11 o'clock. It's only been here an hour. And I said, well, that's it. I'll have that one then. And you can keep othering, and I don't care what you do, so you sort it out. I said, but it's got a tow bar on it, so you'll have to sort that out, because I've got a caravan sat in your lot here, and we're getting nowhere, are we? And he's like, no, I'll tell you what, he said, I'll give you another night. He said, if you'd be so good as to stay in Calgary another night, he said, we'll give you all, meal tickets and hotels, and go get yourself a change of clothes or whatever you want, just give us the bills and we'll pay you back. And he said, I'll make it happen. He said, I should have kept on the ball, he said, and we'll swap it all over and make it happen. So that's what happened, basically. I took Finn, and they kept Albert, and away you go. And when I come back at noon following day, we're all sorted out. Finn were ready to go, and we swat all stuff out of Albert into Finn, and off we went. But Finn was still on ramps. It's still a fixed transmission issue, and away you go. But I did take Finn and hitched up to caravan and drove home, and that was sort of that really, and of play, and things sort of went like that. He lent me a bit of a courtesy car for a couple of hours for night, as it were, and then I ended up taking Finn home, and that was that. But there were a bit of some not drama with money, but of course it were a completely new finance thing, because I'm not a rich man, so it's all on bank own it really, it's not mine. And we ended up then having to sort that out, if you see what I mean, and that was a bit of a drama, and Land Rover Calgary ended up giving a bit more money into the job, if you see what I mean, because there was a refinancing figure that I didn't want to have to pay, or I didn't think I needed to pay, and then there was another figure that I needed to pay that I didn't want to pay, and all, you know how it is. And Land Rover Calgary actually stepped up and paid that, so there was a $14,000 distinct discrepancy between Albert price and Finn price, and I only ended up paying about 5 or 6, I think it were, out of that 14, because I told them it weren't my problem, they'd messed up, and this were their making and they're doing, not mine, and so they sort of did step up a bit really, and they paid me my bills and things for being in Calgary. So in the end they sort of did sort stuff out, if that makes sense, and it turned out all right. And I asked them if they'd be interested in sponsoring some tyres to go up to Arctic Circling, and Häyry, bless him, did say that they would, so they bought me a set of tyres for Land Rover if I was going to give them good reviews. And in fairness, despite starting off in a very bad way, they did make good in end. They got me the car I wanted, and they paid some money towards it to make it happen, and they did fix all the stuff off of Albert onto this one, tow bar and everything. They made that happen very quickly in the end, and I don't know what had gone on between Häyry and his garage manager, but they resolved that problem between them, and they paid me back for all the incidentals that I'd lost, and they paid me back for all the things I'd been overcharged for in end, and so it all worked out right in end, but I didn't end up with the car I had. Now, after that, I heard that the tech that I dealt with, a nice guy, John his name is, he ended up leaving JLR Calgary and going to another dealership in Calgary, Royal Oak, and he really resolved the problem, and it did turn out to be what I thought it was. And for future reference, here's what caused the problem. Now, I didn't know this at the time. I only summated from the evidence that I had what the problem was likely to be, and with some investigation, he did fix Albert, and it turns out that there's a small, short length of loom. We actually took it off that night when I was with him in the garage, just to check the pins hadn't got oil in or out like that. And what had actually turned out to be the case was that those multi-plug connectors, one on each end, it was just a short sort of patch lead. On the male side, 5 of the central pins had been made with the pin receptors upside down. And so they were bending when they went into the female connection of the other part of the loom, if you see what I mean. They were being sort of pushed at an angle, and they were not making a very good contact. So every now and then, of course, you've got a bit of a breaking contact, and you ended up with this problem and threw the car into fault mode. But of course, as soon as you'd locked the car and it slept, the body control module forgot that intermittent sort of blip code issue, and then it started up fine, because there wasn't actually a hard fault, if you see what I mean. But I have been told that a number of these looms were produced because there was one in England that had the same fault, that slammed on limpo mode in the middle of the motorway, and another one in South Africa, all same fault, all with these pins up sort of just the 5 or 6 in the middle of this multi-plug upside down, if you see what I mean, in male side. But it took him quite a while to find it, because of course at a very quick glance the plug looked fine because it weren't dirty and it was all clean and new and, you know, it just looked right. But it wasn't until closer inspection that he found problem. So that is a known issue with this bit of a thing, and I don't know how many cars it affects, but that was a terminal sort of gearbox issue, because it did, once it threw that fault code, it tried to put it in park, basically, is what it were doing. That was the clunk underneath, tried to put it in park, but of course you couldn't put it in park because it was driving, weren't it? It was 30 or 40 or 70 mile an hour, whatever you're doing. And so then that generated a fault code, and away you go. So that's the story of Albert and Finn. How I ended up with Finn and what happened to Albert and the cause of the problem. Anyway, that in not a very short discussion is my story of Albert, really, basically. Albert the Land Rover. I do hope somebody buys Albert, because it was my very first new Defender, and I'm still quite attached to him, basically, in some sort of funny sort of way. I still think he might have been the better car, and I still think the P300 is a better engine. But that's another story, we'll leave that for another day. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in. Bit of a long, rambly story. I feel a lot like Ronnie Corbett here, and I just need me Argyle sweater and a big chair and to tell a joke or two here or there. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening, and I suppose we'll see you on the next video. Cheerio.